Hey guys, it's Daniel back with another reaction video here on American Learns, and today we're going to be doing a little bit of history from really good channel, Armchair Historian. It's called Conquering Europe, German Blitzkrieg, 1939 to 1940. I'm pretty familiar with this period. I'm really excited to see what he has to say. If you're new here, be sure to subscribe. That's the most important thing. Help get this channel up to like 10,000. That'd be a really great milestone we could do. Maybe we'll do something. I don't know. It's all up to well, how much you guys like the channel. Well, I guess I will stop postponing the intro that you guys are all waiting for. Let's watch this video.
Its invasion in 1940. Discuss this topic and more on our Discord, link below.
We got Churchill, Mussolini. Can't tell who that is.
Hi, I'm Griffin Johnson, the Armchair Historian. By mid-
That's a great intro.
The freshly rearmed German nation had conquered nearly all of its neighbors in a series of shockingly quick campaigns. Their success would soon be attributed to a revolutionary new strategy, which journalists and propagandists would call Blitzkrieg. Although it is commonly used today to refer to the overall way in which the Third Reich waged war, the term never referred to an all-encompassing military doctrine, and Blitzkrieg tactics were far from the only reason for Germany's early success.
Also want to throw in there the unfortunates that the tactics themselves were created by the French and the British. They just never, well, adapted them as they won the last war.
Before we continue, I'd like to thank the sponsor of today's video,
Nice, War Thunder.
Online military vehicle combat game available for PC, Xbox, PlayStation, and previous generations. Fight massive.
There we go. Jump right ahead of this. Go support the original creator.
Germany's new war machine was demonstrated for the first time in full during their 1939 invasion of Poland. In planning for the invasion, one of the main concerns.
Little did they know, France at this point posed no real threat. One British general later wrote the French had lied to the Poles and saying that they were going to attack. There was no idea of it. Yeah. I don't know. Would that have made much of a difference? Because, you know, I guess Stalin would have probably taken more ground comparatively. And Germany would have had to redirect forces. We would have missed the phony war period, wouldn't we?
German High Command, the OKW, was the looming threat of France on their western border. Dividing their forces and engaging in a two-front war was out of the question, so German planners concluded that they could only hope to win by destroying the Polish army as rapidly as possible before turning all of their attention west. To achieve this, the OKW relied on the Prussian strategy of decisive maneuver, which aimed for rapid surprise attacks followed by encirclements of retreating enemies. This proven tactic was supported by new ideas about mechanized warfare developed during the interwar period. Most importantly, the concept of the Panzer Division.
Man, can you imagine if Germany wasn't mostly a horse-drawn army and they actually had research? I mean, there would be a different... Like, oh man, I know we talk about alternate history and how like Germany never could win the war, but imagine if they had a huge amount of oil reserves of their own that then they could actually drill for.
While most armies at the time employed tanks primarily as support for their infantry, the Wehrmacht concentrated their armored units into separate divisions and placed them front and center in their operations. The doctrines surrounding the use of these panzer divisions as fast-moving armored spearheads would later form the strategy that we now call Blitzkrieg. But at the time, it was less of a distinct idea and more of a continuation of a tried-and-true Prussian doctrine.
Interesting.
Armored units were very effective during the invasion of Poland, punching through enemy lines with the help of infantry and Luftwaffe dive bombers. Their presence was far from the decisive factor in the campaign's success. Out of the 53 divisions in the German invasion force, only 6 were panzer divisions, while another 4 were motorized. The vast majority of the fighting in Poland was done by conventional infantry.
Yeah, no one talks about the, 2 million horses Germany used. They never filmed them, or rarely did.
With horses playing an important role. Rather than widespread mechanization or brilliant tactics, the Wehrmacht's greatest advantage in its first campaign was arguably the strategic weakness of the Polish army. Diplomatic meddling and false promise from their Western allies had interfered with their mobilization, leaving Polish forces deployed in a thin line too close to their long border with Germany and Slovakia. This left the Poles especially vulnerable to flanking and insurgents.
I see.
By the time the Soviets invaded from the east, the fate of Poland was sealed. In less than a month, the Polish military had been crushed between the armies of Germany and the Soviet Union, and the government had been forced into exile. In April of the following year, the Germans set their sights on Denmark and Norway in order to deny the British access to the Baltic, secure their iron ore supply from neutral Sweden, and gain access to Norwegian heavy water facilities. The invasion of Denmark was met with almost no resistance.
What's heavy water used for at that time?
And was over in less than 6 hours, making it by far the fastest campaign Germany would ever complete. Norway did not fare much better. While the Panzer divisions played a relatively minor part in the Polish campaign, the invasion of Norway would see these new armored tactics take on a very different role, specifically a non-existent one, as the campaign did not involve any armored units. Instead,
Interesting.
the conquest of Norway was accomplished through an amphibious assault utilizing naval, air, airborne, and ground forces in a coordinated, well-timed surprise attack. To minimize their disadvantages against the Royal Navy, the Germans planned the operation during April, when harsh weather on the North Sea would hinder enemy ships and reduce visibility, giving their invasion forces a better chance to safely reach their targets.
Interesting.
As the Kriegsmarine held off the Royal Navy at sea, infantry units captured several key ports, while paratroopers were deployed to seize key airfields. This sudden and decisive attack caught the Norwegians and their allies off guard. Although it would be 2 months before the Norwegian army would capitulate, the nation's capital and most of its major cities fell to the Germans' amphibious invasion within the first 24 hours.
So they really took it out.
Was not the only important role that the Kriegsmarine played during the first 2 years of the war. Although Germany was blockaded immediately after the war started, the Germans also simultaneously began their convoy raiding campaign. U-30, for example, sank the British ocean liner SS Athena mere hours after the war declaration. The British soon adopted the convoy system and formed anti-submarine hunting groups based around aircraft carriers. This would soon backfire, as the HMS Ark Royal, Britain's modern aircraft carrier, was almost sunk 2 weeks after the war declaration, and another British carrier, the HMS Courageous, would actually be sunk 2 days later. German submarines would...
Yeah, I'm not super familiar with the submarine warfare of the Atlantic. I always figured that the lone wolf attacks and unescorted convoys happened a lot longer than it seems like they're putting it out to be. Interesting.
Infiltrate the British base at Scapa Flow and sink a battleship, the HMS Royal Oak. With the adoption of Wolfpack tactics, the U-boat fleet had immense success, sinking millions of tons of shipping. Even surface raiders like the Admiral Hipper and the Admiral Scheer had success attacking British convoys. This period of early success would be nicknamed the Happy Time by German sailors. A month after the invasion of Norway, the Germans finally ended the 8-month phony war by launching their western offensive into the Benelux and France. The German plan relied heavily on fast-moving armored and motorized units to exploit weakness in the Allied defenses. On May 10th, the German army launched a surprise attack.
Just gotta say, I love the way that this is shot. It's like a cartoon where he's sitting in front of.
On the neutral countries of the Benelux. Overwhelming force, combined with daring airborne assaults, quickly managed to break...
It doesn't look like green screen to me. I mean, maybe it's just really good. Does he have like a backdrop sitting behind them where all this is printed out? That would make the most sense. I mean, maybe I'm just me looking at the green screen, or possibly, but it looks like maybe I see a little bit of artifacting right at the very top of this chair. Someone let me know how this is filmed. I'm just curious.
Break the back of the Dutch army, while the Belgians, supported by both France and Britain, buckled in the face of Hitler's finest panzer formations. Rather than attacking the enemy head-on, fast-moving German units outmaneuvered their Allied counterparts to cut off their supply lines and disrupt reinforcements. It was these armored spearheads that drove through the Ardennes, avoiding the Maginot Line and encircling the British expeditionary forces around Dunkirk. The British were only spared from disaster by a daring evacuation.
Right.
With the close support of the Luftwaffe, the invading forces were able to wreak havoc on Allied logistics with devastating results. The Germans also took advantage of the fact that the French deployed their tanks evenly across the front line, which allowed them to mass their concentrated attacks. A great number of
Yeah, it's not good to have that if you're gonna be outnumbered to that degree. From what I remember, the French tanks were better, stronger, less reliable, less radio.
France's dreaded Char B-1 battle tanks, in many ways superior to contemporary German tanks, wound up being abandoned across the battlefield after running out of fuel, with their impressive armor barely scratched. German logistics, on the other hand, functioned very smoothly, with a report from Panzer Group Kleist asserting that there was not a single supply crisis that his group was unable to resolve.
Well, that's not gonna last forever.
This was in large part thanks to France's infrastructure, which included a large quantity of gas stations. The steady supply of fuel allowed the panzer divisions to race ahead and attempt the encirclement maneuvers that would ultimately play a major role in the rapid
Germany's like, we'll just use your fuel.
destruction of the French army. The stable supply lines the Germans enjoyed during the Western Offensive were absolutely critical for continuing their fast-paced armored maneuvers. Without them, the Germans' rapid advances could not be sustained. After Dunkirk, it only took the Germans 3 more weeks to conquer the rest of France. The fall of France also had the added benefit of providing the Germans with Atlantic naval bases to contribute to the success of their U-boat fleets. Meanwhile, the Germans would establish the Vichy French government in the south. The incredible success of the French campaign cemented a popular image of the Wehrmacht as an unstoppable machine, capable of rolling over its enemies with overwhelming speed and strength.
Ha!
Even the German leadership was largely taken in by the notion of their invincibility, despite the fact that it was blatantly false. The German war machine certainly had its strengths, but it was far from unstoppable, as the failure of Operation Barbarossa would later reveal. The consistent breakneck pace of the Wehrmacht's operations led many outside observers to conclude that Hitler and his generals had devised a completely new way of waging war. However, far from a clear doctrine that had guided all of their European campaigns, the idea of Blitzkrieg was, if anything, a loosely defined strategy in the minds of the OKW. Multiple German officers, like Heinz Guderian and Ernst Volkheim, had extensively written on armored warfare during the interwar years.
It's very interesting, though, that's what he's trying to say. I never really considered that Blitzkrieg was more of a term than a strategy. Because it always sounds like a strategy. It's always described as a strategy, but it sounds like it's just a confluence of different ideas coming together, leading to a predictable outcome. Interesting.
The Civil War in Spain proved to be an especially useful testing ground for these tactics, with the Germans deploying tanks and air support in combined arms tactics. It was these strategies that would later be refined during the campaigns in Poland, the Benelux, and France. After the fall of France, the United Kingdom remained the sole great power opposing the Germans. The Germans had no
Take that, Ireland.
intention to keep
I think to this day there's not a building in Ireland that's over 12 stories tall.
the war going, but under leadership of Winston Churchill, the British were not open to negotiation. Thus, the Germans began a mass campaign to achieve air superiority over England in order to force the British to the negotiating table. At first, the Germans targeted naval convoys, ports, RAF airfields, infrastructure, and industrial centers. Still, the British continued to resist, so Hitler ordered the OKW to plan an invasion of Britain, Operation Sea Lion, as a contingency measure. Aided by radar, the RAF continued to inflict heavy losses on the Luftwaffe, and the Germans began to bomb civilian centers in an effort to terrorize the British public.
So one thing I'm going to throw in there that I get it, because you can't talk about everything in the war at once in one video. So originally, the Luftwaffe was going after strategic targets, airfields, and radar. I don't think that they fully understood what radar was doing and how effective it was, but they were targeting it nonetheless. The most successful thing that Churchill could have possibly done is when he launched that single, I think it was like a single sortie over Berlin that did negligible damage, much like the Doolittle raid that happened later. But it was such an affront to the invincibility that Germany put up, which I guess is kind of what he's talking about right there anyway, that Hitler redirected everything to civilian targets, whereas if he had just stuck with the logistical targets, the airfields, come down to, oh my god, we're just attacking, we're attacking military targets. These barbarians, they're attacking us, whatever. We're better than them. Just if they kept going, I'm not sure it would have made a difference. I'm not sure long term it would have made a difference at all. We know it wouldn't. There's really nothing Germany could have done to win at that point. So I just think it probably wouldn't have been good to just start bombing civilians, because we know that when Britain got the chance to bomb back, they did. They did in huge numbers.
Into submission. Unfortunately for the Germans, this had the complete opposite effect, galvanizing the British public against them. Eventually, heavy losses forced the Germans into nighttime raids, which essentially meant relinquishing their attempt to obtain air superiority. That being said, these raids would go on until mid-1941 and would be nicknamed by the press as the Blitz, a term that remains in British popular consciousness. Even if Europe was already in the midst of another world war, German diplomats were nonetheless still hard at work. While the air battle was raging over Great Britain, German Foreign Minister Joachim von Ribbentrop and diplomats from Italy and Japan met in Berlin to formalize their alliance by signing the Tripartite Pact. In the subsequent months, Hungary, Romania, and Slovakia would also join the pact, followed by Bulgaria and Croatia in 1941. There is no denying that the Wehrmacht had achieved a series of remarkable victories during the first year of the war, effectively conquering Europe at breakneck speeds. While it can be tempting to explain all of these early conquests as the result of Blitzkrieg, the reality is far more nuanced. The Wehrmacht's earliest operations were carefully planned, taking full advantages of their enemy's weaknesses. German troops were fresh and well supplied by a smooth logistics network, relying on the kind of aggressive surprise attacks that had served the Prussian armies well for decades. These advantages saw the Third Reich through a number of triumphs, but they would ultimately not be enough.
You can't sprint a marathon
To achieve total victory. Thank you again to War Thunder.
Thank you, War Thunder. That was fascinating. Okay, so I'm getting what he's saying. That was interesting. So I always want to learn something new in any video about history, because history tells us how to deal with the future by understanding the past. And I learned from this is that everyone outside of Germany looked at Blitzkrieg more as a strategy and a doctrine than internally, where it was just a series of ideas that they put together to effectively do the same thing, but it wasn't a doctrine. It was just a set of ideas that they were doing. And I think that that's an interesting way to look at it. And it makes sense. Every time that they're doing an invasion, they're able to further hone this ability that they're doing. Very interesting. And yeah, that's fascinating. Huh. Well, if you've enjoyed that video and I want to see more of it, or want to suggest something I should watch, let me know in the comments below. I hope you enjoyed this video and spending some time with me. I'll see you guys next time.